The emergence of new coronavirus variants is making the vaccine rollout timeline more urgent than ever. As the New York Times headline says, no one is safe until everyone is safe, meaning the longer it takes to get shots in everyone's arms around the world, the more dangerous mutations we'll likely keep seeing. As of now, less than 2% of the people in the United States are vaccinated. But here's some of the good news we promised. Another vaccine is on the horizon, with Johnson & Johnson expected to apply for emergency use authorization from the FDA in the coming days. And because it only requires one dose and doesn't need to be kept nearly as cold as the others on the market now, the hope is it'll do a lot of good in a lot more places. Clinical trial data released Friday shows the vaccine was 66% effective overall, 85% effective in preventing severe cases with not a single death. I'm joined now by the Boston researcher who partnered with the pharmaceutical giant to lead that vaccine's development, Dr. Dan Barouch, director of the Center for Virology and Vaccine Research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Doctor, it's good to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Can we work backwards for a second? Was I right when I said the likelihood of Johnson & Johnson applying for emergency use authorization in the next week or so is quite likely, correct?
Yes, J&J is planning to apply for emergency use authorization for this vaccine in the coming days, so hopefully this week.
And how shortly after approval, assuming they get it, will the first batch be shipped?
Well, that's really up to the FDA. The FDA does do a very, very thorough job in reviewing the data, not just the company-provided data, but all of the underlying raw data. And that's why they do take a little bit of time before they render a decision. For previous vaccines, it's been about 3 weeks before the FDA has come to a decision, and they have the external advisory committee to render opinions as well.
Yeah.
But if all goes well, then it's possible that FDA will grant emergency use authorization by the end of the month.
While most of us had never used the word efficacy and vaccine in the same sentence in our lives, we all think we've become experts. And when we hear the Modernas and the Pfizers are in the 90% range and the Johnson & Johnson is a bit lower, we have concerns. Why should we not worry about the lower efficacy rate for Johnson & Johnson?
It's really comparing apples and oranges because the previous vaccines that were tested last fall were really a different pandemic. We have a much more complicated pandemic now, a pandemic that spans the globe, a pandemic that has multiple different variants, some of which are more contagious and some of which are actually resistant or partially resistant to antibodies. And so it's a tougher time now for any vaccine to show efficacy than the trials that were done last fall. So unless vaccines are really tested head-to-head, then it's very difficult to make any comparative statements.
But by the way, I want to confirm that what I said up front is correct, which I think is the most important thing. In terms of prevention of death and hospitalization, your trial was absolute, correct?
Yes. So in the United States, the vaccine shows 72% efficacy in preventing mild disease and 85% effectiveness in preventing severe disease. And that was actually in the U.S. and throughout the world, and 100% effectiveness in preventing hospitalizations and death. So I would say, what's the goal of a vaccine? Is it to prevent the sniffles, or is it to prevent you from getting sick?
When you and I spoke in the fall, I asked you, raised the concern that people of color were not being included in some trials at numbers that were representative of their piece of the population. You assured me that in the Johnson & Johnson trials, it was a representative number. I assume I got that correct. Were the results comparable for people of color and whites in terms of the effectiveness of the vaccines in your trial?
Yes, there was a substantial representation of multiple racial and ethnic minorities in the J&J trial, and the high level of efficacy against severe disease was really seen across all subgroups. So that's very good news.
That is good. Speaking of variants, I pulled some numbers from one of the reports on Johnson & Johnson in terms of efficacy. And as you see, overall, 72% U.S., Latin America, 66%, South Africa, 57%. Well, obviously, the South African number is low, and that appears to be the variant that is of greatest concern to people who have expertise like you. I assume in some ways that number, though lower, the 57%, if I'm reading it correctly, is in some way assuring people that this vaccine will deal relatively well with that strain. Am I right about that or no?
Yes, actually, I was very concerned that this vaccine and all vaccines might actually have much, much lower efficacy than that against the South Africa variant. So although that number is lower than the fact that it is 57% effective in a population in which there is almost completely the resistant variant, as well as the fact that even in South Africa, there was an 89% effectiveness against severe disease, is very positive results and very reassuring. Our concern was that the number might have been much, much lower, and that would apply to all the vaccines and not just this one. So to some extent, although it highlights that the variants are a problem for vaccines, it actually is also reassuring and suggests that the vaccines, although they are less effective, still have substantial efficacy that translates into a very high level of clinical protection.
You know, about an hour before I had an opportunity to speak to you today, I was on the top of my list of concerns was the variants. And then I read a story on the Associated Press saying the CDC released data today suggesting that only 38% of nursing home staff, 38% accepted the shot when it was offered to them. What's the consequence of a pathetically low rate of acceptance, whether it's hesitancy, whatever the cause is, in a place where obviously the likelihood of damage is so severe?
Well, what we're seeing now is we're seeing a decline in vaccine hesitancy. As more and more data is coming out showing safety and efficacy of all of these vaccines, then what we're seeing compared with last fall, what we're seeing is a decline in the levels of vaccine hesitancy. Now, it's not where it needs to be.
How about this nursing home thing, though?
So, I mean, clearly there is a lot of work to do. There is an improvement, and what we need to have the population vaccinated to the highest level possible as quickly as possible. Because not only does vaccination help protect the individual and also the community, but also we need vaccines to be rolled out more quickly to help prevent the emergence of new viral variants. It's clear the emergence of the current viral variants is really the product of the virus going through millions or 100 million people unchecked in a short period of time. And the only way to stop the emergence of new variants that might actually become even more worrisome than the current ones is if we redouble our efforts to accelerate the vaccination campaign and for people to continue to practice social distancing.
You only have 30 seconds left, but how does it feel to have played such a major role in the development of a vaccine that is likely to save tens of thousands of lives? What does that feel like to you, Doctor?
Well, thank you for the question. Quite honestly, it hasn't really sunk in yet. We've been so busy and we've been working so hard trying to develop this as a safe and a highly effective and a highly implementable vaccine that I think we haven't really gotten to the point to reflect on it. But we're just delighted that the efficacy results came out very, very good. We're hoping that the FDA review agrees with that assessment and that this vaccine can quickly be rolled out to the public, both in the United States and throughout the world, and can help save lives.
Hope it sinks in soon. Doctor, thanks for your work. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.